Lin Mei's life had never been ordinary, though anyone looking at her on the day she was led into the gray-walled penitentiary would have thought she was just another frail woman swallowed by the system, a fragile shadow who kept her head bowed and her lips sealed as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. Yet the truth was that long before she became an inmate with nothing but a number and a cell, she had been a daughter of discipline, a child molded in the hidden courtyards of an old kung fu school run by her grandfather, a master who believed in silence, patience, and precision. He had raised her after her parents died in a fire, teaching her that every movement of the body carried meaning, that every strike of the hand must be guided not by rage but by balance, that the greatest strength of a warrior was not power but restraint. And so from the age of 7 she rose before dawn, bruising her knuckles against wooden dummies, stretching her legs until they burned, breathing slowly through pain and sweat, and though the outside world never knew, within those walls Lin Mei grew into a weapon sharpened by tradition and grief. But fate had other plans, because the world beyond kung fu was not as disciplined or just, and when she grew into a young woman, beautiful but haunted, she found herself working 2 jobs in the city to support her grandfather, who had grown old and ill, and it was during those weary nights of carrying trays in restaurants and cleaning floors after hours that she met the man who would drag her into darkness. A wealthy businessman with greedy eyes, who harassed her, who one night cornered her in an alley when she tried to quit his club job, and in defending herself Lin Mei struck him harder than she intended, a single blow meant to scare him that instead left him lifeless against the wall, and though the truth was self-defense, his family's influence turned justice into chains, and so she was sentenced for manslaughter, stripped of her freedom, marched through the prison gates where her story as an inmate began. Inside, the air smelled of sweat, metal, and despair. The guards were indifferent, the inmates broken or cruel, and at the center of it all ruled a woman known only as Big Reena, a towering brute with scarred skin and eyes that burned with arrogance, her body covered in crude tattoos and her voice as loud as the steel doors that slammed shut each night. And she was not just a bully but the queen of the prison, feared by all, obeyed by most, and even respected by certain guards who preferred to let her keep order through terror. Lin Mei arrived quiet and humble, never looking for conflict, but that very silence painted a target on her back, because in a place where weakness meant exploitation, Reena thrived on preying upon the fragile, and to her, Lin Mei seemed like the weakest of all. The first humiliation came at the cafeteria. Lin carried her tray carefully, sitting at the edge, hoping to be invisible, when Reena swaggered over with her gang of loyal lackeys, women hardened by years behind bars, and with a cruel smile Reena knocked the tray to the floor, spilling rice and soup across Lin's shoes, then laughed, "Eat from the ground if you're hungry, little mouse." The hall erupted with laughter, and Lin, her face calm, simply bent down, picked up her tray, and ate silently from what remained, never once meeting Reena's eyes, and that silence was more infuriating than resistance, for Reena wanted screams, wanted tears, wanted fear. In the days that followed, Reena made Lin her favorite target, stealing her blankets as she shivered through the nights, pouring cold water over her bed so she slept on wet sheets, shoving her in the corridors while her followers laughed, even threatening to cut her hair, a sacred symbol of dignity. Yet Lin endured all of it, her eyes lowered, her voice quiet, her body still. To others she looked broken, but within her she was counting breaths, practicing restraint, waiting. The other inmates whispered that she would not last, that the fragile newcomer would soon be consumed like so many before her, but there was something in her stillness, a weight they could not name, a fire they could not see. The prison itself was a world of predators and prey, and Big Reena thrived at the top. She extorted cigarettes, food portions, and even favors, controlling not just her gang but the rhythm of daily life. Guards often looked the other way, either paid or too tired to care, and so the balance of fear remained, until Lin Mei's silence began to stir something unexpected. Some prisoners noticed she never flinched, not even when slapped, never trembled, not even when cornered. They began to whisper that perhaps she was different, that perhaps beneath the fragile frame was a strength unseen, though none dared voice it too loudly, for Reena's ears were everywhere. And Reena herself grew restless, because tormenting Lin brought her no satisfaction. No matter how cruel the insult or harsh the blow, Lin never gave her the fear she craved, only a quiet stare into the ground, and this infuriated her, until one afternoon she decided humiliation was no longer enough. She needed to break Lin completely, in front of everyone, once and for all. The day of reckoning arrived beneath the burning sun of the prison yard, where cracked concrete and rusted fences trapped hundreds of women in their routines of exercise, gossip, and watchful silence. The guards leaned lazily against the walls, barely paying attention, confident that Rena's rule kept order, and into this stage Rena marched with her gang, her heavy boots echoing, her eyes locked on Lin, who sat quietly in a corner, sketching invisible shapes in the dirt with her finger, breathing steady. The crowd felt the shift in the air, whispers spread, bodies moved aside, forming a ring, because everyone knew Rena was about to make her move, and everyone wanted to watch. Rena towered over Lin, cracked her knuckles, and sneered, "Time to teach you where you belong, mouse." Lin looked up for the first time in weeks, her gaze calm, her lips still, and something in her eyes flickered, a depth that made even the closest inmates pause. Rena swung her massive fist, certain she would knock the fragile woman senseless, and in that instant, time seemed to slow, the yard holding its breath, for this was the moment when silence would either shatter into defeat, or explode into legend. The punch never landed, because at the last possible moment Lin Mei's hand shot up like a striking serpent, catching Rena's wrist in midair with a grip of steel that seemed impossible for her small frame, and before anyone could comprehend what had happened she twisted, and the sound of tendons stretching echoed across the yard as the bully's body lurched forward, slammed face first into the concrete, the shockwave of disbelief rippling through the ring of inmates like a sudden gust of wind, and gasps broke out everywhere, guards leaning forward in surprise, the gang stunned into silence, because in a place where Rena's fists had always ruled, someone had not only resisted but reversed her attack with a calm so terrifying it seemed unreal. Yet that was only the beginning, because Rena's followers, loyal to her reign of fear, rushed forward with snarls, one wielding a sharpened toothbrush, another a piece of chain, but Lin Mei's body moved as though possessed by the spirit of every master before her, each strike sharp, precise, efficient, her legs sweeping out in arcs that sent bodies crashing, her hands striking with bone-cracking force, her movements not wild but controlled, like a dancer weaving destruction, and within seconds the ground was littered with groaning, gasping women clutching ribs and faces, their weapons skittering uselessly across the concrete, the air filled with the stunned silence of those who could not believe what they had just witnessed. Rena, red with fury and humiliation, staggered to her feet, bellowing like a wounded beast, and charged again, her massive frame thundering across the yard, but Lin pivoted lightly, her foot snapping out in a perfect roundhouse that cracked against Rena's jaw with the sound of a sledgehammer striking stone, sending the giant sprawling against the fence, blood spraying from her mouth as she collapsed in a heap, twitching, broken, defeated, and the yard went deathly still, every eye fixed on the woman they had thought weak, fragile, harmless, now standing in the center of the ring breathing slow and steady, her gaze calm, her posture unshaken, and it was in that silence that someone whispered the words that would echo through the prison for years, "She's a kung fu master." From that moment Lin Mei was no longer prey, she was legend, and the prison hierarchy shattered overnight, because no one dared touch her. Not the bullies, not even the guards who had once mocked her, for they had seen what she could do, and fear mingled with awe whenever her name was spoken. But legends do not remain hidden forever, and while Lin Mei might have thought her greatest battle was behind her, the truth was that the fight in the yard had drawn eyes she could not see, because word spread beyond the prison walls, carried by a guard who filmed the clash on a smuggled phone, and soon whispers reached the city of the fragile prisoner who had destroyed the queen of the penitentiary with martial arts unseen in decades, whispers that traveled to the underworld where enemies still remembered the death of the businessman she had struck, and whispers that reached the ears of men in suits who knew her grandfather's name, men who had long sought the disciples of the old kung fu masters believed to be extinct, for they craved to use them as weapons, and so the prison that had once been her cage slowly transformed into a stage upon which powerful forces played their games. In the weeks after the fight, Lin Mei lived in uneasy peace. No one touched her, and some even looked to her for protection, the very same women who had once laughed at her now bowing their heads in respect, and for the first time since her arrival she allowed herself small acts of kindness, sharing food with the weak, teaching breathing exercises to those who had lost hope, and in doing so she became more than a fighter, she became a quiet guardian within the prison walls. But peace cannot last in a place built on power, and Rena, though broken, nursed her hatred in silence, plotting revenge, whispering promises to the guards and the gangs that if they helped her rise again, she would give them control, and one cold night her gang tried to ambush Lin Mei in her cell, But what they found was not weakness but the same storm that had destroyed them before, and when the guards arrived they discovered 3 bodies unconscious on the floor, Lin standing calm, untouched, her eyes steady, and though they dragged her to solitary confinement, her legend only grew stronger, for now even the walls themselves seemed unable to contain her. It was during that isolation that the twist of fate revealed itself, because one morning the warden himself came to her cell, flanked by strangers in dark suits whose eyes were sharp and calculating, and they did not see an inmate but a weapon, a relic of ancient discipline in a modern world of corruption. They knew the truth of her case, that the man she had killed had not only been a predator but a trafficker tied to powerful families, and while his death had been twisted into a crime against her, the reality was that she had struck down someone many in secret had wanted gone, and now those same people debated whether she should rot in a cell or be molded into something far greater. The warden leaned close, his voice low, telling her there were 2 paths: remain here until time devoured her, or accept a hidden bargain, freedom in exchange for service, training operatives in the art she carried, using her skills not for balance as her grandfather had taught, but for the agendas of men who saw her as nothing more than a tool. For the first time since her arrival, Lin Mei's calm faltered, because she understood the cruel twist. Her greatest display of strength, the very act that saved her from Reena, had drawn the chains of power tighter around her neck, and now her silence could not protect her. When she was finally released from solitary, the other inmates greeted her as a queen, whispers of awe following her steps, but within her burned a storm, for she knew freedom might come not as a gift but as another kind of prison, one where she would be forced to betray the very balance her grandfather had given his life to teach. And so the story that began with humiliation and a single fight did not end with victory but with a question that lingered like smoke. Had Lin Mei destroyed Reena to win back her dignity, or had she revealed herself too soon, becoming prey to powers greater than any prison bully? Weeks later, the day of her early release arrived, shocking everyone, for no inmate had ever walked free so suddenly, and as she stepped beyond the gates dressed in plain clothes, the women behind the fences shouted her name, their voices echoing against the sky. But waiting for her outside were the same men in dark suits, their black car idling, the door open like a mouth ready to swallow her whole, and with a final glance at the gray walls she left behind, Lin Mei stepped inside, her fate twisting once again, because though the world would remember her as the prisoner who killed the arrogant bully and ruled with silent strength, only she knew the truth. That her fight had never truly ended, it had only shifted to a larger arena, and the chains she wore now were invisible, forged not of steel but of obligation, and whether she would use her mastery to break them, or be consumed by them, was a story yet to be told.